Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. My name is Reed Schneider. I'm a Director of Communications here at Grayscale Investments, and you're watching Grayscale Live is 2024, the Bitcoin election. Today, we're going to be looking at the results of our newest survey conducted in partnership with the Harris Poll that asks likely U.S. voters their opinions and thoughts on the upcoming election, the market, and cryptocurrency. Before we begin, it's important to note that this call is for informational purposes only and is not intended to be, nor should it be construed or used as, investment, tax, or legal advice, an investment recommendation, an IRA provider recommendation, or an offer to sell, or the solicitation of an offer to buy any digital asset or security. Clients of Grayscale may maintain positions in the digital assets discussed on this call, and any opinions expressed throughout this live stream are solely my own or the panelists' own, and do not necessarily express the views or opinions of Grayscale or any of its affiliated entities. And with that out of the way, let's get right into it and meet our panel of experts. I'd love to go down the line and have everyone introduce themselves. Maybe Craig, we can start with you.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. I'm Craig Somm. I'm the Chief Legal Officer at Grayscale. I just want to say, Reed, great job reading that disclaimer.
That's what I'm here for.
I'm Rebecca Purser. I'm a Senior Research Manager at the Harris Poll. I work on our Media Communications Research team. We do all different kinds of thought leadership research in the political space, social topics, healthcare, financial services, all the things. So I'm really excited to be here today, and thanks for having me.
My name is William Ogden Moore. I'm a research analyst at Grayscale, and I've been here for just over a year. In addition, I also spent 8 years of my life in DC, so this is a particularly interesting topic to me, and excited to dive in.
Hi, everyone. I'm Michelle Solomon. It's lovely to be here. I'm a vice president at the Harris Poll on the same team as Rebecca. And the Harris Poll has been around since 1963. In case anybody didn't know, we've been conducting public opinion research since then on every topic under the sun. And cryptocurrency is just the latest one. So we're excited to be here. Thank you.
Well, I'm thrilled to have all of you here. I think before we get into the survey and the data itself, it might be helpful for viewers just to get a flavor of the methodology and kind of who was surveyed and what we were really after. And so maybe Michelle and Rebecca, if you wouldn't mind giving a little bit of background on that.
Yeah, I can give an overview. I think it's always helpful to know sort of who we talk to and how we talk to them. So we surveyed, and it was all through an online survey, and we surveyed right under 1,800 U.S. adults who plan to vote in the 2024 presidential election. This is wave 2 of this research. So the previous wave was conducted in early December of 2023. This one was rolled out right at the end of April of this year. So they're about 5 months apart, important context that we'll get into in a little bit. But yeah, the last piece of methodology that I think is important to note is that all of the data that we'll speak to today has been weighted. And what I mean by that is that it is both projectable and representative of the US population at a grander scale. So all of our data has been balanced to make sure that it really matches the country makeup in terms of age, gender, race, ethnicity, region, all of those things. So.
Awesome. Well, turning to the actual data itself, I think one of the top line findings that was immediately clear, and if we bring up the first graphic that we can visualize this, is that inflation continues to be the top concern among voters leading up to this election. I think this was continued to be the number one since phase 1. And so I turned to the group, and just in terms of, as voters are thinking about this election, obviously inflation has been making a number of headlines, continues to be top of mind as the survey showed. Was that expected? Do you think voters are going to continue to lean in? What's sort of your reaction to that?
Happy to jump in. I think a couple things. One thing that really stood out to me is voter concerns around inflation, voter concerns around the economy, and kind of what this has to do with Bitcoin and crypto in particular. So voters have really made it crystal clear that inflation in particular is the single most pressing issue facing America today. And so inflation scored over 2 times more than any other issue facing America. So the public is concerned about inflation. They're looking for tools that can help protect their financial well-being. And Bitcoin can kind of serve as one of these tools. And this is reflected in the data as well, which shows that voters are increasingly likely to turn to Bitcoin and crypto assets in response to economic uncertainty in the form of geopolitical tensions all around the world, in the form of inflation, and in the form of risks to the US dollar as well.
Yeah. I think if I can add to that, which is that we've seen that theme about inflation being top of mind for the public in a variety of data that we've conducted at the Harris Poll. So our monthly Harvard Harris Poll finds the same thing. The economy is the number one issue, inflation. People think their own personal situation, financial situation is worse rather than better, right? It's getting worse rather than getting better. They think the economy is weak. So there's a great deal of concern in this. And we saw this also in our reputation quotient that recently was also released, and where inflation was a causal factor to people grading corporate reputation lower than in the past, because they are worried about increasing prices and what companies are or aren't doing about that. So it's a big issue.
And one of the features of Bitcoin and crypto that we see investors become very enticed by is the fact that Bitcoin and crypto can be a hedge against inflation. Something like Bitcoin that has a fixed supply, it cannot just be created by a single actor like a government. And we actually just went through another halving of the Bitcoin supply, which cuts its rate of supply in half. That happens once every 4 years, showing that it does continue to reflect that deflationary aspect. And I think the halving was one of the events that actually came up in the poll that I'm sure we'll get into.
For sure. Rebecca, you had teased that this was sort of phase 2 of a multi-phase survey. And these are questions we're asking voters over time to see how they changed. In thinking about the last the last time we asked these questions to now, what were some of the changes or similarities? Were voters really continuing to lean in on the same topics, or were there things that changed over time?
Yeah, so we had a good mix of both. I think one thing that's important to keep in mind when we look wave over wave is that anything that I'm going to call out as, we saw a shift, is a statistically significant shift. So that's how we look at wave over wave tracking research, is to see what's significant at a statistical level. So it's pretty common, I would say, for even annual trackers to see certain data points move by, honestly, not much more than like 2 to 3 percentage points. So there were a couple of key areas where we saw 6, 7, 8 percentage points in terms of difference between wave 1 and wave 2. That's pretty noteworthy, I would say. That's especially in a 5-month span. I think part of it speaks to the overall heightened everything that's important to people is really they're speaking their mind on it. It's on their mind, and it's also what they're thinking about in terms of the election. So some things were a little bit unexpected. So I would have expected, one question that we asked was, how important are these various aspects to you? So financial stability, your family, your own health and wellness or personal safety, I think. Even those shifted a little bit wave over wave. And again, I think that gets to that. What's important to people and what matters to them is really more and more. It's sort of a revved up feeling of what they're reporting on. We did see, though, also some really interesting shifts that were very particular to crypto. So we saw more attention being paid to crypto due to current economic and geopolitical climate issues, more positive perceptions of crypto as a good long-term investment opportunity, and even greater likelihood to vote for a candidate that's educated and informed about crypto. And some of those, again, were 5-6 percentage point jumps between just 5 months ago. So especially as we think about wave 3, I'm really interested to see how things change. Will they change? Will they stay the same? It definitely shows some movement, though, in a pretty short amount of time.
That's interesting. So, I mean, given the backdrop of inflation being top of mind, geopolitical tensions being top of mind, the survey showed voters are now increasingly seeing crypto as a good long-term investment compared to other financial products. Is that really a consequence of this economic situation and voters now looking for alternative assets like crypto or new places to invest their money? Or is crypto also just getting more popular as a result of some of the things Craig teased, like the Bitcoin halving and some of these other events? Any thoughts there?
Yeah, can it be all of the above?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Inflation, what's going on in the world, just an overall level of uncertainty that I think people have. And also I think the degree to which it's becoming more regulated, the recent legislation and the spot Bitcoin, I think all of those things, it's in the news, it's becoming more familiar to people overall. And then I think it reduces the degree of misinformation people might have, lack of education, or even the riskiness that some people might associate with investing in something like crypto.
Yeah, and the inflation points, I think, make sense for the ones that we covered briefly. In terms of geopolitical tensions, you have an asset like Bitcoin that is not controlled by any single one government, whereas other fiat currencies like the dollar, the yen, the euro, and so on are. And so I think it's natural for individuals to look to a global, decentralized, non-government-owned asset to hedge some of their investments. And then in terms of being a long-term investment, and people starting to lean more in that direction. I think events surrounding things like Bitcoin, ETP approval, and so on that have kind of given it a stamp of approval in a way has also helped a lot of investors that may have waited on the sidelines to become more confident that it can be a good long-term investment.
If we can real quick bring up the second graphic that shows a little bit of voter interest in crypto and how they expect crypto to now be a component of their portfolio, might be interesting to viewers. Any other thoughts in terms of what might be driving voters towards crypto?
I can
Go ahead.
So one thing is that we did ask pretty directly, like, how has inflation impacted your interest in crypto? Does it make you more interested or less interested in investing in crypto? So we asked that wave 1 and wave 2. And we, again, saw a peak in those saying that they're more interested in investing in crypto as a result of inflation. So we can say, I think, fairly directly that a lot of it is definitely tied to inflation. But I think it's also what's in people's ether in terms of what they're hearing about. So we asked a new question for this wave was, since the beginning of the year, so really since top of 2024, have you, how have your views on crypto changed just since then? And we're seeing people who are more interested in researching crypto. So they're sort of at that really, first step of maybe exploring the journey of investing through crypto, but also a third of voters saying that they're either more open to learning more about crypto or investing in it, actually following through and investing in it since just the beginning of the year.
We've been talking about crypto broadly, but, Bitcoin specifically has certainly had a lot of momentum this year, in particular from, as Craig said, the approval of spot Bitcoin ETPs in January to hitting an all-time price high a few weeks ago, as well as the Bitcoin halving event, which you mentioned. So these are all making headlines. And so as I'm sure voters are seeing this in the news, if they've heard of crypto or Bitcoin, maybe they're paying a little bit more attention to it. But is that noise to them, or is it really only going to affirm folks that are already interested in crypto? Or do you think maybe some of these events are attracting new investors or voters that maybe weren't interested before?
I think there are a number of different events that we've kind of mentioned, but I think I would point to the Bitcoin spot ETF approval in particular as kind of a landmark moment, both in terms of bringing a new investment vehicle to market, but also in terms of adding legitimacy to this entire asset class going forward. As well as kind of media engagement and education, as we said. Another interesting finding was that there are many voters that believe that crypto can help provide more access to the financial system. And when you think about it today, if you're looking to invest in an innovative tech startup, for example, you have to be an accredited investor. And this comes with certain stringent requirements in terms of income or in terms of net worth. However, in crypto, anyone can be an investor. And so I think that voters are kind of recognizing this and valuing this as well.
Yeah, I would just completely agree with all of those points. I do think that the approval of spot Bitcoin, ETFs, ETPs, et cetera, did legitimize the asset class for a lot of investors that for a long time might have just waited on the sidelines or maybe never really considered it as an investment. But the moment that Bitcoin and then we're thinking, Ether sometime in the future as well, and hopefully other assets after that, once it's in that wrapper that investors have used for every other investment they've made, stocks, bonds, other commodities, and now cryptocurrencies, I do think it was not just noise, but actually was a very landmark and pivotal event for them. One of the other findings in the study was that I think 100% or almost 100% of those polled after Bitcoin ETF approval knew about Bitcoin. And then for Ethereum and Ether, the underlying asset, for that protocol, it was about 50%. But that was before the recent news that we had for spot Ether approval in an ETF wrapper. So it'll be interesting to see in phase 3 how that number specifically changes, because now we have sort of a control experiment to see how those events really do impact how much people know about this asset class just based on those developments.
Yeah, we have other data also to really confirm the legitimization of spot Bitcoin. Like we have other consumer data where before and after the spot Bitcoin, the percentage of people who say trustworthy associated with Bitcoin went up significantly. So again, there's this growing interest. And even this data shows that with regulation and more legislation around it, people will become more comfortable. So it will give them a comfort level to invest, right? And it will unleash all that interest.
And that has actually stayed, in terms of talking about what's shifted and what's stayed steady wave over wave. We saw that wave 1 and wave 2. So that's a pretty common, steady state is people want more regulation, and they want, they're also thinking of Bitcoin and crypto as a means of making the financial system more transparent as well. So both equitable and more transparent, I think.
Yeah, and that's the great thing about the ETF wrapper. It does bring the assets further into the regulatory perimeter, because then you have the Securities and Exchange Commission, which regulates those products to become listed on national securities exchanges, which are subject to their own rules and regulations and surveillance. So all those protections are really important, I think, have resulted in that larger interest and larger knowledge and awareness.
So you kind of teased this, Craig, but I did find it interesting that compared to, I think it was 99% of voters said they were aware of Bitcoin, 50% actually said they were aware of Ethereum. And this is, again, before the we'll say positive signs from the SEC around spot Ethereum ETPs. 50% being aware, and I believe it was 32% said they were familiar with Ethereum. However, before the Ethereum started making headlines, this does somewhat seem a little bit higher, at least from my perspective. Obviously, the team here at Grayscale, we're talking about Ethereum and Bitcoin all the time, all day, every day. But for maybe folks not as close to the crypto ecosystem, Rebecca and Michelle, was that number tracking what you expected? Were you both familiar or aware of Ethereum before we started this survey? What's sort of your reaction to that?
Yes, so we are definitely not as in the nitty-gritty with crypto as you all are. So yeah, I think a lot of times people have just heard the word, and awareness alone can be just based on, I've just heard the name. So I had heard of Ethereum, and that's about it. I did not know really much about it. And I think that most of that 50% that say that they're aware of Ethereum is exactly that. If you ask them follow-up questions to explain what it is, how it's unique, they wouldn't really be able to speak to that. We see that because only 1 in 3 say that they're actually familiar with it. And again, with surveys, there's a level of self-inflation with some of that as well of, how familiar are you actually? Could you actually answer follow-up questions? Maybe not even of those who are familiar. We also, if you drill down even further, we asked, are you familiar with it and you own it? And so that drops even further down to 12%. And that's pretty typical with what we see, I would say, of whether it's an emerging product, it's an emerging brand. The touch point of awareness of just you've heard of the brand is going to be obviously a lot higher than true familiarity. As you start to get past, some of the early adopters, it will naturally increase more and more. I think to Michelle's point about the ETF, spot Bitcoin ETF approval, increasing trust, I think that trust will also go right hand in hand with familiarity. And you'll also see that 12% actually owning increase as well as as people get more and more familiar with it and there's more trust built with it.
It'll be interesting to see how this changes the next time we ask the question, now that it's certainly moving closer to the regulatory perimeter, as you said, and certainly being discussed more. Well, we've taken a look at some of the macro context. We've talked about crypto, but as we said at the beginning, this is really a survey about voters in the upcoming election. So with the first debate tomorrow in November increasingly creeping up, let's switch over to that. And if we bring up the third graphic, I think viewers would be interested to see that the survey overwhelmingly found that crypto is a bipartisan issue with similar ownership rates and interest among both parties. Especially this year, we've seen out of DC certain legislation like FIT 21 and SOB 121. And it seems like both parties have extended support and interest for these types of bills. Given sort of that backdrop, maybe Craig, this is a question for you. What's sort of the crypto environment in DC right now, and what should voters sort of expect as we get closer to the election?
So I actually think that finding reflects the reality that we experience here at Grayscale. We'll often go down to DC, to the Hill, have meetings with members of Congress and their staffers on both sides of the aisle, in the Senate and in the House. And we have found that it is a bipartisan or a nonpartisan issue is actually what we like to say, because there really is no reason why somebody's politics should cause them to have a view on crypto, which is a technology that can be used to create more efficiencies in one's finance. But just thinking about what we see on the Democratic side, for instance, a lot of folks gain interest in crypto because of its ability to democratize finance, which is disintermediate banks. We may not think of it, but a lot of Americans are unbanked or underbanked just because they don't have what it takes to open up a simple account, or it's very costly for them to send money either nationally or some internationally to other family members they have. So a lot of Democratic members of Congress like crypto's ability to democratize finance in that way. And then whereas on the Republican side, they become interested in the ability to open up markets for different market participants and individuals, because you don't need those intermediaries in between that can be helpful, but also not helpful if it keeps others from participating in finance. So both sides of the aisle, very interested in crypto and learning more, becoming educated. I think for a while there was this view that crypto might just go away, but that has definitely gone out the door. And now it's a matter of needing to have an informed view on it, whether or not you are pro or anti, in the sense of just wanting to make sure that consumers or investors are protected to the extent they engage in it. We can get more into this, but there's several bills that have started to make their way through the House. There's one bill that is focused on a very common, prominent use case of crypto known as stablecoins, which is maintain a peg to the US dollar. And then another bill called the Financial Innovation and Technology for the 21st Century Bill, or FIT21. That is a more comprehensive market structure bill that focuses on the intermediaries in crypto, because they do exist for folks that are not as comfortable getting fully involved on the crypto networks. So that's very promising to see those bills start to make their way through committees, and then the House in the case of FIT21. And then again, you are seeing support on both the Democratic and Republican side of the aisle.
Yeah, I was just going to add on to that, the fact that crypto has really become a bipartisan issue. Both the bills that you talked about had support from across the aisle from Democrats and Republicans. And this was shown in the Harris poll data that we showed up on the screen as well, in terms of voters really being split in terms of whether they think one party is more favorable than another. In addition, voters from both parties really agree that they would prefer a candidate that's well educated about crypto. So I think this all points to the same point, that this is a rising topic for voters, that crypto is a bipartisan issue again. And I just take a step back and say, it's worth acknowledging that this is even a topic of conversation in Washington and in this election in the first place. And I think that really points to how far this industry has come in the past couple of years.
Yeah, and I think from our phase one of the Harris poll study, one of the things we wanted to point out was it was right around the first time that crypto was actually mentioned by candidates during the primary debates.
Yeah.
We'll see if it comes up in presidential debates tomorrow night. But even if it doesn't, the level of progress that we've seen in Congress across the presidential candidates with these bills, I think is just astounding. And it just goes to show how seriously this asset class is being taken by the U.S., which is great.
And it's hard to find something that we would call a nonpartisan issue these days. So the fact that this is in that space, I think, is a positive for everybody. It grows.
Well, we've touched on the economy, we've touched on crypto, and a little bit about how Democrats and Republicans are thinking about crypto. Before we move on to some questions from the viewers, I wanted to just open it up and make sure there wasn't anything we wanted to either underscore or go back to, or any other tangential thoughts the panelists might have had. Anything worth noting or calling out?
Yeah, my final thought would just be that I think there's a great deal, I think the data shows there's a great deal of interest in learning more about it. More people are researching, and that once regulation becomes more put into place, there could be a great, some of those people are going to also start to invest. So that's where I think that connection is.
One other thing that I would add is just pointing to young voters. So some people believe that young voters will or could decide this upcoming election. And young voters own crypto at much higher rates than any other demographic, and at rates that are higher than equities and stocks. In addition, half of young voters said that they would consider candidates' positions on crypto before placing their vote. So I think that this is, this issue of young voters is worth paying attention to as we head to the third wave.
Yeah, I think that's natural because young voters grew up in a digital world. And so for them, money being purely digital is not so foreign the way it might be for an older voter who is used to the traditional banking system. And we'll often think, well, what's the need for a digital currency like Bitcoin? But younger voters are very readily able to grasp the value of that. And so that's why they want their presidential candidate to at least have an informed view on crypto as opposed to not truly understanding it.
Awesome. Well, for the viewers who have been watching us, we invite you to join the conversation by scanning the QR code that should be at the bottom of your screen. That will bring you to the Slido website where you can submit questions that we will then hopefully get through a few of with the panelists. So we'll give folks a minute or two to submit any additional questions or things we may not have gotten to that you were curious about, and then we'll read them with the panelists. Looks like we already have one. So to the group, were respondents to the survey only people who owned crypto? Any other demographic or otherwise breakdown of who was surveyed that you can provide?
Yeah. So it was not only crypto owners, it was likely voters in the 2024 presidential election. So that gives us a slice of that is going to be, or sorry, not crypto voters, but crypto owners. A slice of that will be crypto owners. 1 in 5 of our full sample said that they owned crypto. But the other, nearly 80% did not. And I actually think that we approach studies in a different way in terms of who we're going to talk to. And I think it's great to have people who are not necessarily owners of it yet, but are still, familiar, aware, interested, and those who are not, so that you can really see sort of like comparisons of perceptions. Of that 1 in 5 that did own crypto, it was a pretty... I would say it was a pretty mixed and diverse base. It was mostly male. It was mostly younger, as Will said, so Gen Z and millennial voters, a lot of Black and Hispanic voters, and pretty evenly spread across political affiliation as well.
Right. And that 1 in 5 statistic, we've also seen in other studies that have been conducted by peer firms of ours, that 20% of Americans are crypto owners or have been crypto owners.
Another one just came in. You spoke a lot about inflation, but what other concerns were top of mind for voters ahead of the election? So I think some of the others were including immigration, gun violence. Can we maybe talk about some of the other things that came up, and was that consistent with phase 1?
Yeah, I would say timing of waves matters a lot. So it was the same core set of sort of what the top 3 voting considerations that people have are. They shift a little bit wave over wave. So one that we saw go down a little bit, I believe, was gun violence. Our wave 1 was very close in timing to a major national shooting. So I think that was, on people's mind in wave 1. We saw that shift a little bit, but I will say it was the same sort of core set of what was important to voters, stayed consistent. It's also consistent with other research that we see that inflation, especially, and the economy is really like the top of mind to people right now.
One other thing that I'd add is just in terms of Democrats versus Republicans, it was interesting to kind of look into that data and see that on a relative basis, Republicans seem to prioritize inflation and the economy a little bit more than, this makes sense, but social issues like gun violence, which Democrats tended to value a little bit more.
And we just got another one that said, any predictions for wave 3? Or anything we might be keeping a particular eye on as we go to the next one?
Well, the one I would say is, not to keep harping on the ETF, ETP topics, this is what I spend a lot of my time focused on, but I do think that event does very much increase awareness for a lot of investors and likely American voters. So I personally would be very interested to look at that awareness about Ethereum statistic pre and post the positive progress we've seen on the Ether ETPs. And we'll see if it's a matter of just knowing about it or hearing about it, or if they actually have a deeper understanding of it. So maybe we'll include questions in there trying to get to that point specifically.
Yeah, I think it'll be interesting also to see if the interest that we see and with the newer approvals, if it starts to turn into more people owning crypto.
Any other thoughts? Any other questions from our viewers? We'll give a couple more seconds. Well, I want to thank everyone for being here. It was great speaking with you all. I am super excited to see where the data winds up netting out in wave 3. For anyone watching that's curious to learn more or would like to see more of the data, please visit us online at www.grayscale.com/elections, where you can check out the full survey. Thank you so much for being here.
you.